Que Dios cuide de mi hijo y de España. Padre, he cumplido con mi deber hasta el final. Que Dios tenga piedad de mi alma.
Hey guys, tonight we reveal the chilling secrets from the life of Margarita Teresa, the Habsburg princess who endured 6 incestuous pregnancies, countless miscarriages, and died tragically at the age of 21, under ruthless political machinations. Imagine a 5-year-old girl forced through incestuous rites, every breath controlled just to preserve a pure bloodline. You would not survive hearing these brutal fragments of her existence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment below to let me know where you are and what the local time is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Immediately after we step into the corridor, aglow with candlelight and the lingering scent of incense, let us turn our gaze to the source of this tragedy, Margarita Teresa Maria of Spain. The Habsburg princess born on the 12th of July, in the year 1651, at the Alcázar palace in Madrid. She was the 6th and youngest daughter of King Philip IV, a sovereign both resolute and beset by vicissitudes, and Empress Mariana of Austria. Margarita Teresa did not enter the world cradled in the warmth of familial affection. Her full name, each syllable evoking both splendor and sorrow, reflected her predestined mission to preserve the pure bloodline of one of Europe's most formidable dynasties. Within the Habsburg family, every member served as a piece in a grand strategy of power. Philip IV, born in the year 1626, once ruled Spain through war and political intrigue, but he also bore the heavy cost of incestuous marriage policies. Maria Anna, sister of Emperor Ferdinand III, was brought from Vienna to Madrid at the age of 14 to become empress, and at 22, she welcomed her youngest daughter, Margarita. From the very beginning, court records did not refer to Margarita by a child's given name, but listed her as a political instrument, a role assigned to her before she drew her first breath. Margarita Teresa was the half-sister of Prince Philip Prospero, her brother, who suffered from numerous illnesses and died at the age of 8, leaving unanswered questions about succession. She was also the half-sister of Charles II, who later ascended the throne, but was deprived of both body and mind by the consequences of generations of inbreeding. In that small circle of kinship, Margarita grew up between intertwined bloodlines, where the sound of the violin and the words of the sacred liturgy mixed with the strict protocols and lavish ceremonies of the royal court. The princess's childhood unfolded behind ornate wooden panelling, where velvet draperies were drawn at a moment's notice whenever foreign dignitaries arrived. Instead of folk games and the laughter of children her own age, she knew only hours of language lessons, Latin, Spanish, and German, to ensure she could perform correctly at Austrian court functions. Every step and every word of Margarita was scripted, from her graceful gestures in courtly dances to her demure curtsies before king and empress. There exists a famous painting called Las Meninas, in which the master painter Velázquez depicted Margarita at the age of 5, her only fleeting moment of true childhood freedom amid the machinery of court ritual. The light in the painting highlights her unspoiled innocence, while the surrounding shadows foretell the harsh years to come. Beneath that bright-eyed naivete lies a tragic destiny. The little princess was not permitted to be a human being, but was compelled to sacrifice her entire existence in service of Habsburg ambition and power. Now that we have understood Margarita Teresa's origins and the circumstances of her birth, we shall proceed into the next chapter of her woeful story, her years of being trained as a reproductive tool. 6 incestuous pregnancies, countless miscarriages, and ultimately her tragic death at the age of 21. Prepare yourselves to witness the fate of a child bound by royal blood with no hope of escape. From her earliest childhood, Princess Margarita Teresa was never an ordinary little girl. but rather a bargaining chip on the diplomatic chessboard of Europe. The moment the princess could sit upright in the ornately carved wooden chair of the royal court, the palace physicians began recording every health metric: chest circumference, body weight, and complexion after each meal. One afternoon, the court apothecary compelled the princess to swallow a bitter potion to stimulate the vital humours, and the princess grimaced and complained. This tastes awful, but obediently took another sip when the woman reminded her, "Remember, princess, you are the hope of our entire lineage." Those words struck the princess's heart like a dagger, a constant reminder that every breath she took was measured for her future childbearing potential, not only in matters of medicine but also among the courtiers of both Spain and Austria. There was constant negotiation over dowries, territorial promises, and overseas privileges intended to entice Habsburg brides to distant courts. One day, the Austrian ambassador arrived, bearing a map of Italy with the region of Piedmont highlighted in bold, sweetly promising. If the princess consents, this entire kingdom could be hers. The princess could only watch the adult's eager eyes at the mention of land. Having no real understanding whether these promises were rewards or the price she was expected to pay, the princess's lessons were never chosen according to her own interests. Instead of reading fairy tales about Snow White or practicing floral sketches, the princess spent her hours on sacred texts and learning to sing Latin hymns to ingratiate herself with the Vatican's emissaries. The clashing of metal on metal in sword training sessions, a symbolic ritual, rang out regularly to refine her regal posture on horseback during parades in Salamanca. One month, a delegation from the English court visited, and a young count praised the princess's courtly dance as an angelic ballet. The princess managed a hesitant smile, secretly longing for the fields of Castile, where only the sound of shepherds' flutes and ring-toss games on grassy meadows filled her days. The royal diet was its own harsh story. Each morning, the princess was served a bowl of oat porridge with a single firm biscuit, followed later by a plain boiled vegetable soup. In stark contrast to the sumptuous feasts of the nobility, the princess was forbidden from touching sugar-coated fruits or rich cuts of meat. Every serving was weighed on a small copper scale, and each piece of produce on her plate had to be uniform in size. On one occasion, the princess surreptitiously tasted a golden butter biscuit in the kitchen and was immediately discovered by her governess, who admonished, "We must control fat intake to maintain a slender figure." All the court attendants recorded the princess's expression in that moment, between the sweetness of butter and her hesitant gaze to adjust her future menus. Despite numerous paintings and poems that praised her angelic beauty, golden hair like summer sunlight, the princess carried within her a genetic heritage excessively concentrated by inbreeding, a protruding lower jaw, pallid skin, and chronic frailty. When the seasons changed, the palace physicians often whispered among themselves, "This princess will not be strong enough to carry a child to term." They jotted these concerns into their journals, only to silence themselves out of deference to the crown. An elderly physician once confided to a courtier that if the princess's diet included more carbohydrates, she might be healthier. But he was sharply rebuked and told, "Do not leak the secrets of our pure blood policy." Of second. Meanwhile, the princess diligently practiced courtly dances and harp performances to captivate foreign delegations. One afternoon during a harp rehearsal, the princess's clumsy finger snapped a string, and tears brimmed in her eyes. Her music master gently repaired the string and whispered encouragement, "Well done, princess. You will master this soon." In that moment, the princess felt the warmth of personal care, but also realized that such affection came only from craftsmen, never from the royal family. In spite of the evident genetic risks, the court remained steadfast that only marriages within the royal house could preserve glory and power. When the princess turned 9, one morning a visiting princely envoy from Mantua presented her with a white rose and complimented, "Your beauty is as pure as a winter bloom." The princess inhaled the flower's fragrance deeply. recalling the time she had secretly accompanied a court attendant to fly a kite in the castle courtyard. The wind tangling in her hair. She had laughed as she nearly fell, until a maid reminded her, "Bow to the royalty. Do not forget your manners." These small episodes, though simple, bring into sharp relief the tragedy of a princess who could never experience a true childhood. Every moment of joy was like a raindrop in a storm of politics. Each flicker of innocence was instantly extinguished by the scent of incense and whispered negotiations. Margarita Teresa, despite her angelic grace, could not escape the calculating gaze and invisible hand of the Habsburg dynasty. From her earliest years, her life was confined within a gilded cage of power. Every moment measured for diplomacy and reproduction. When she was only 11 years old, Princess Margarita Teresa became the centerpiece of marriage negotiations with Leopold I, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was also her maternal uncle. This was a decisive move to reinforce the alliance between the Spanish and Austrian branches of the Habsburgs, both of which were under threat from internal discord and external aggression. The negotiations stretched on for months. Held in council chambers, where the rustle of parchment and the tolling of grandfather clocks marked each passing hour, the envoys of both courts sat facing one another around a massive ebony table, debating fiercely the terms of dowry, inheritance rights, and even the right to establish military garrisons in the Tyrol region. On one occasion, a Spanish grandee brought his gavel down with the ringing declaration, "We shall not yield on Dona Anna's portion, for it is the linchpin of peace." To that, the Austrian representative arched an eyebrow and retorted, "If you do not cede the 2 towns of La Gruyere as well, this alliance will be worth no more than discarded parchment." The princess's value was catalogued like merchandise. Her ripe beauty, her mastery of languages, she spoke Latin and Spanish fluently and had begun learning German at the age of 7, and the exhaustive medical reports of the royal physicians on her capacity for childbearing. Each report recorded the date of her first menstruation, her weight index, body fat ratio, yet there was never an entry for personal wishes or inner emotions. Whenever the subject of her future was broached, the courtiers fell silent, their eyes on the dossier with grave solemnity, as if preparing to sign contracts over precious territories. The marriage contract was formally signed on the 25th of April in the year 1663, when the princess was only 12 years old. Under its terms, the official wedding ceremony would take place when she reached 14. In Madrid, the proxy wedding ceremony was conducted with full pomp. The Austrian ambassador stood in for Leopold I, swore the oaths before the altar of the Holy Cross, while Margarita Teresa wore a voluminous gown embroidered with golden dragons, her expression as solemn as any adult's. Within the halls of the Alcázar palace, the sound of a deep-toned organ filled the air. Candlelight flickered along the aisle, yet the princess's face revealed unmistakable anxiety, as if she were performing in a play with no script to guide her. At the end of December, in the year 1666, in Vienna, the young empress's coronation and official wedding took place amid a spectacle of festivals, processions, and military parades. Soldiers in gleaming armor marched in formation. War horses shimmered beneath enameled barding, and brass fanfares announced their procession through the Hofburg Palace. Margarita Teresa's dress comprised multiple layers of pristine white silk trimmed with gold thread, and a spray of magnolia blossoms pinned at her bodice made her look as delicate as porcelain. A silver scepter, engraved with the double-headed eagle, was placed in her hand, symbolizing the weight of imperial destiny. Yet the 14-year-old princess's heart was heavy with apprehension and alienation in this unfamiliar environment. The harsh tongue of German and the rigid Austrian court etiquette left her isolated and adrift amid curious, scrutinizing eyes. Immediately after the wedding rites, the young empress's first duty was to produce a male heir for both Habsburg branches, Leopold I. Though reserved and somewhat gentle in his manner, showed respect for his youthful bride. Yet, under immense pressure from courtiers and the medical staff, he could not intervene to spare her from near-daily medical examinations. Each morning the princess's blood pressure was taken, her weight recorded, and vaginal swabs collected. Each afternoon she practiced calisthenics to prepare her body. The court apothecary had drawn up a stringent diet and exercise regimen. The princess was allowed but a serving of corn porridge, 2 spoons of boiled vegetable broth, and a single slice of fresh cheese to bolster her strength for the coming pregnancy. IB. During one health evaluation, a physician drew the golden velvet curtain around the examination bed to spare the princess embarrassment and whispered, "Your Majesty? The test results indicate your estrogen levels are sufficient. Your likelihood of conception is very high." The princess offered a forced smile and gazed distantly out the window at the gentle snowfall in the garden. Recalling her warm Madrid home and the vibrant springs she once knew, any private thought was swiftly silenced when her lady-in-waiting entered and softly reminded her, "Your Majesty, please prepare your attire for the Savoy delegation's forthcoming audience." Time passed in a blur of examinations and training, with not a moment's genuine rest for the princess. In the spring of 1667, just months after the wedding, she officially became pregnant for the first time. The palace drums beat a triumphant announcement of the news, but within the princess's heart there surged a wave of fear at the thought of giving birth so young. The court threw banquet after banquet to celebrate the promise of dynastic continuity, while the princess yearned for a single moment of peace, to rest her head on a pillow and listen to the sparrows chirping outside her window. Princess Margarita Teresa, at 14 years old, had not yet fully grasped the gravity of the destiny thrust upon her. Those early months of pregnancy were both the pride of an empire and an invisible burden on her slender shoulders. Beneath the vaulted splendor of the Vienna palace, the princess gradually came to realize that personal happiness had no place in the life of an empress predetermined from the cradle. Less than 3 months after her proxy wedding, in early 1667, Princess Margarita Teresa discovered she was pregnant for the first time. The court erupted in jubilant celebration, as though a great victory had been won. Yet the princess, now 15 years old, was consumed by dread at the thought of the labor pains that lay ahead. From that moment on, every aspect of her care was calibrated solely to safeguard the pregnancy. She was monitored by midwives, administered prenatal tonics, and placed on a strict regimen of rest. Not once did anyone offer her emotional solace or acknowledge her fears. By the end of 1667, after 7 harrowing months of anticipation, the princess suffered a devastating miscarriage. No time was granted for her to grieve or regain her strength. The court immediately pressed her to prepare for a second conception. At the dawn of 1668, tragedy struck again when her first child arrived stillborn. The court physicians, determined to prevent another loss, subjected her to bloodletting, herbal purges, and enforced immobilization. These treatments, archaic and often harmful, left her physically weakened and emotionally numb. Despite her frail condition, the court's demands did not relent. Within a matter of months, plans for her third pregnancy were already underway. Finally, in January of 1670, the long-awaited birth of Archduchess Maria Antonia brought a fleeting moment of triumph. The court trumpeted this arrival as proof that the Habsburg strategy had succeeded, yet the victory was short-lived. The young princess's body, still recovering from the previous traumas, was not given sufficient time to heal. Before the year's end, Margarita Teresa faced the burden of a fourth pregnancy. The Austrian court maintained its strict disciplines, daily medical examinations, regulated diet, mandatory rest without any regard for the princess's mounting weakness. As the relentless cycle continued, the young empress's spirit grew ever more withdrawn. Court chroniclers noted her absence from festive banquets and her growing reluctance to participate in diplomatic receptions. She spoke little, preferring the quiet company of the Spanish ladies-in-waiting who had accompanied her to Vienna. In stolen moments, she would gaze out the palace windows, longing for the sunshine of Madrid and the laughter of childhood games. Leopold I, though genuinely affectionate and concerned, found himself helpless before the immense pressures of the imperial court. He sought to comfort his wife with gentle words and rare private dinners. Yet he dared not oppose the cabinet ministers or the medical council who dictated every detail of her life. The marriage of Margarita Teresa and Leopold I, once seen as a union of two branches in strength, became a poignant symbol of personal sacrifice. Their relationship, while marked by mutual respect, was overshadowed by the unyielding demands of statecraft. Tender moments, a shared glance during a nighttime vigil, a slip of a hand in the privacy of their chambers were swiftly eclipsed by the clamour of court protocol. Each whispered exchange carried the sorrow of what might have been a life lived freely. A family formed by love rather than duty. Throughout her late teens, the princess endured each pregnancy with stoic resolve. Her body, the battleground upon which dynastic ambitions were waged, even as she bore the physical scars of repeated childbirth and lost pallor, exhaustion, and chronic pain, she remained bound to the expectations of the Habsburg legacy. No celebration was complete without the whisper of her next confinement. Every lull in court affairs only served to heighten the anticipation of her next childbearing requirement. By late 1670, Margarita Teresa's health had visibly declined. Her once bright eyes, immortalized by Velázquez at the age of 5, now held a distant sheen, as though she were perpetually living within the confines of a dream from which she could not awaken. She walked the palace corridors with measured grace, yet her steps betrayed fatigue. The court physicians, ever dutiful, continued their monthly checkups, recording her vital signs in ledger after ledger, but offering no comfort beyond clinical observations. Leopold I, witnessing his wife's suffering, attempted to ease her burdens. He petitioned the council to allow her more rest and to moderate the intensity of her medical regimen. But his entreaties were gently rebuffed in the name of preserving the royal bloodline. The ministers reassured him that the future of the empire depended upon the princess's continued fertility. Thus, the young empress remained ensnared in a cycle of nurturing and deprivation, joy and despair, life and loss. In the hushed chambers of the Hofburg, away from the dazzling festivities, Margarita Teresa's solitude became palpable. She confided in her closest attendant that she feared she was merely a vessel, valued only for her capacity to birth heirs. Yet such intimacies were rare and quickly hushed. The palace walls, lined with portraits of Habsburg ancestors, seemed to bear witness to her anguish, their painted eyes reflecting the toll of generations of inbreeding and political machination. Thus, the fourth pregnancy came and went, leaving the princess ever more fragile. The court, blinking in the bright glare of imperial pageantry, scarcely paused to measure the cost. To them, each miscarriage or stillbirth was but a setback in the great enterprise of dynastic continuity. To Margarita Teresa, each loss carved deeper into her soul, stitching sorrow into the very fabric of her being. By the time her 20th birthday approached, the cycle worn her down to a shadow of her former self, the once vibrant princess, whose laughter might once have echoed through the castle halls, now spoke only when addressed, and then in hushed tones. Her dreams of a life filled with art, music, and simple pleasures had long since been replaced by a singular dread. The next order of the court physicians, the next letter from the council, the next summons to bear yet another child. And so, the palace's grand salons and echoing corridors held within them the silent testament to a life claimed by politics. Margarita Teresa, at heart, a child who should have danced in sunlit meadows, remained confined within gilded walls, her body marked by the relentless demands of empire, In the next chapter, we will witness the culmination of her suffering, the tragic toll of 6 pregnancies and countless miscarriages, leading to her untimely death at the age of 21. Prepare to bear witness to the most heartrending pages in Habsburg history. By the time Margarita Teresa entered her 5th pregnancy in early 1672, her body was already on the brink of collapse. Months of relentless strain had left her thin and frail. She endured constant pain, frequent bleeding, and recurring infections that sapped her strength day by day. Yet the Austrian court remained adamant that the young empress continue to carry her child to term, dismissing any concern for her well-being, despite clear signs of physical exhaustion and grave medical risk. The physicians and ministers pressed on, convinced that dynastic duty outweighed any threat to her life. As spring waned and summer neared, the princess's condition deteriorated rapidly. She spent her days confined to a bed of silken sheets in the Hofburg Palace, a gilded cage in which she fought feverish chills and agonizing cramps. Court attendants moved silently about her chamber, adjusting pillows and administering poultices of bleeding hemlock and willow bark. None dared question the wisdom of these treatments, though each seemed more punishing than the last. The palace halls echoed with the distant strains of harp music, intended to soothe her, but the notes fell flat against the harsh reality of her suffering. In the first days of 1673, Margarita Teresa went into premature labor. The palace physician summoned all available staff to the birthing chamber, where candles flickered in the chill Vienna air. Leopold I, pale and shaken, stood vigil at her bedside, clutching her hand as midwives and surgeons tended to her trembling form. The labor progressed swiftly but catastrophically. The infant, a son, by all accounts the heir they coveted, was stillborn, and the young mother's weakened body could not endure the trauma. On the 12th of March, amid hushed sobs and the distant tolling of church bells, both mother and child passed away within hours of each other. Margarita Teresa was only 21 years old. Almost as soon as her body fell cold, the court officials convened to discuss Leopold I's next marriage prospects, treating Margarita Teresa's death as little more than a diplomatic setback. The funeral arrangements were executed with elaborate precision. A procession of black-clad nobles, a canopy of damask cloth over her coffin, and a requiem sung in 4-part harmony, reverberating through St. Enard, Stephen's Cathedral. The ceremony's grandeur served not to honour the princess's life, but to reaffirm the unbroken might of the Habsburg dynasty. Her name barely graced the eulogies. Instead, the ministers spoke of the alliance she represented, the territories to be secured, and the bloodline to be preserved. In Madrid, the reaction was scarcely more compassionate. Spanish courtiers, upon hearing the news, exchanged curt assessments of the political repercussions. They feared that without Margarita Teresa's potential offspring, the tenuous bond between Spain and Austria might falter. Within days, emissaries were dispatched to negotiate new marital arrangements for Leopold, hoping to secure another Habsburg bride who could restore the dynasty's hopes. Personal grief gave way to strategic calculations, leaving no room for genuine mourning over a life extinguished so prematurely. The genetic consequences of decades of inbreeding continued to haunt subsequent generations. Charles II, Margarita Teresa's half-brother, was born with severe physical and mental disabilities that rendered him incapable of producing an heir. His incapacity precipitated the War of the Spanish Succession, which raged from 1701 to 1714. As rival European powers vied for control of the Spanish crown, the very alliances Margarita Teresa's marriage had sought to cement unraveled into a continent-wide conflict, culminating in the extinction of the Spanish Habsburg line. Meanwhile, the Austrian branch fared no better. Successive marriages failed to produce robust heirs, and the empire's influence waned as internal strife and external challenges mounted. The once unassailable Habsburg hegemony in Central Europe gave way to the ascendancy of other dynasties. The catastrophic toll of incestuous unions had left both branches weakened beyond repair. demonstrating that the pursuit of pure blood had been a hollow and self-defeating ambition. Yet amidst this political and genetic ruin, the artistic legacy of Margarita Teresa endured. In Las Meninas, Velázquez captured the luminous innocence of the princess at the age of 5. Her wide eyes and golden curls, contrasting with the shadowy court attendants behind her. The painting stands as a silent indictment of the system that sacrificed her life, a testament to the tragedy of a child raised as a political instrument under the guise of preserving royal lineage. Viewers across the centuries have been struck by the haunting quality of her gaze, as though the little girl on canvas silently pleads for the humanity that was denied her. Thus, Las Meninas became more than a masterful work of Baroque portraiture. It became a powerful symbol of innocence exploited, a reminder of the human cost of dynastic ambition. Margarita Teresa's brief life and her untimely death resonate far beyond the gilded halls of the Hofburg. Her story endures as a cautionary tale about the perils of allowing power and lineage to override compassion and individual agency. Today, art historians and humanitarians alike invoke her memory to underscore the enduring imperative to protect the vulnerable from the machinery of state and the pursuit of unbridled authority. The moment Princess Margarita Teresa breathed her last, the courts of Vienna and Madrid displayed a chilling indifference. In Vienna, the mourning rituals unfolded on a grand scale, lasting for weeks, and consuming thousands of gold ducats. There were torchlit processions, solemn parades of the Imperial Guard, and elaborate requiem masses, all less an homage to a young life, and more a proclamation of unwavering Habsburg supremacy. Despite the young empress's passing, within days, Austrian ministers were quietly soliciting marriage proposals, treating Margarita Teresa's death as a mere diplomatic failure, to be remedied by a fresh alliance for Leopold I. Meanwhile, in Madrid, the reaction was equally cold. Rather than lament, the Royal Council recalculated dowries and revised marriage treaties with other European courts to compensate for the collapse of the Austrian alliance. Secret dispatches circulated between Spanish envoys, coordinating military detachments and financial subsidies to cushion the political blow, while carefully omitting any mention of sorrow or human compassion. Courtiers and senior officials spent more time negotiating compensation packages than they did acknowledging the personal loss of a daughter and sister. The princess's funeral became, in effect, a diplomatic pageant. Clerics in black cassocks mingled with generals in full-dress uniform, their ranks interspersed with soldiers bearing standards of the double-headed eagle. The procession through the Hofburg Palace courtyards resembled a military review, complete with drum rolls and trumpet calls, rather than a tender farewell. Every ritual from the incense-laden nave of St. Stephen's Cathedral to the gilded hearse served to demonstrate the empire's undiminished grandeur. The underlying message was clear. Although a life was extinguished, the dynasty's bloodline, and thus its power, remained intact. The stark tragedy lay in how swiftly the personal grief that might have united two kingdoms was overshadowed by transactional maneuvering. The very bridge that Margarita Teresa had been meant to fortify between Spain and Austria was abandoned in favour of fresh treaties, new bride searches, and property swaps. A princess once hailed as the jewel of the Habsburg court became, in official annals, to a mere footnote, her memory reduced to entries in protocol, books and treasury ledgers. There was no lingering scent of genuine incense or spilt tears to mark her passing, only the cold calculus of realpolitik. In the weeks following her funeral, diplomatic correspondence revealed the harsh priorities at play. Spanish ambassadors in Vienna exchanged coded messages about reallocating the dowry funds to fund shipbuilding in the Mediterranean. Austrian foreign ministers, in turn, drafted proposals for territorial concessions in the Tyrol and Lombardy, all in the name of preserving the imperial bond. Personal letters between courtiers, usually rich with empathy, became terse notes on troop placements and revenue streams. Even the memory of Margarita Teresa's final days was swiftly appropriated for propaganda. State historian compiled volumes listing her lineage, her regnal titles, and the territories she had symbolically united, though never acknowledging her suffering. The young empress's name adorned banners and coins, her visage minted on commemorative tailors. But these images bore little resemblance to the vibrant child Velázquez had immortalized. Instead, they projected an idealized symbol of dynastic continuity, erasing the humanity of the girl who had lost everything to political expediency. Yet for all the pomp and circumstance, the genuine bonds between Spain and Austria proved fragile. The hastily arranged successor marriage failed to produce the unity anticipated, and rival courts soon sought to exploit the apparent disarray. The War of the Spanish Succession loomed on the horizon, fueled in part by the unresolved tensions left by Margarita Teresa's untimely death. The very alliances she had been raised to cement unraveled in the diplomatic vacuum her passing created. In the end, Princess Margarita Teresa's fate stood as a bitter testament to the ruthless logic of royal strategy. Her funeral spectacles and contractual negotiations masked the painful truth. A life of promise, stripped of agency and sacrificed to lineage, was mourned not as a young woman's loss, but as a piece of territorial chess. The Habsburg dynastic machine made clear that individual grief was irrelevant. Only the ongoing spin of power and inheritance mattered. In that cold calculus, the princess's human tragedy faded into the background, leaving behind only the hollow echoes of empire. The death of Margarita Teresa plunged the Spanish Habsburg dynasty into an immediate succession crisis. Charles II, her half-brother, already bore severe physical and mental impairments and was incapable of fathering an heir, leaving the crown without a clear male successor. This calamity rendered all hopes of a strengthened Austria-Spain alliance, secured through Margarita Teresa's marriage, futile. European great powers began eyeing the frail Spanish throne, poised to intervene in the brewing contest for the kingdom's inheritance. In the year 1701, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted when France, England, Austria, the Dutch Republic, and numerous smaller states declared support for rival claimants to the vacant crown. The legacy of Habsburg inbreeding, which had once served as a political bulwark, now became the primary cause of eroded confidence among European courts. Spain's economy, already strained by years of military overextension and fiscal mismanagement, collapsed further. Its armies were under strength, and internal divisions deepened. Consequently, Spain gradually lost its holdings in Italy, the Low Countries, and various German principalities. The downfall of the Spanish Habsburgs ultimately stemmed from centuries of incestuous marriage policy. As the royal bloodline grew increasingly frail, fertility rates plummeted, and the monarchy lacked robust heirs. This power vacuum invited foreign influence and opportunistic aggression, eroding Spain's century-long supremacy. By the mid-18th century, the Bourbon dynasty had supplanted the Habsburgs on the throne of Madrid, bringing to a close a reign that had lasted nearly 3 centuries. From the tragic story of a single princess, the lesson becomes clear. No matter how formidable a regime's might, it pays a steep price when it sacrifices human dignity and lives for dynastic or political gain. The Spanish Habsburgs, once feared across Europe, were ultimately undone from within by the very belief that royal blood could perpetuate itself, untainted, through incest. Today, historians and ethicists alike view Margarita Teresa's life as a cautionary tale. The juxtaposition of her innocent portrait in Las Meninas against the harsh reality of her upbringing highlights the perils of subordinating individual welfare to monarchical ambition. In an age that venerates her artistic legacy, her story endures as a silent indictment of policies that prioritize lineage over humanity, reminding us that power untempered by compassion can sow its own destruction. Maria Antonia, the sole surviving child of Margarita Teresa and Leopold I, was born in January of 1670 as a beacon of hope for the Habsburg alliance. Yet her life soon mirrored her mother's tragic fate. at the age of 15. She was married off to Maximilian II Emmanuel of Bavaria and thrown headlong into the machinery of dynastic politics. As a teenage princess sent to a foreign court for the singular purpose of producing heirs, her very existence served as a stark reminder that the Habsburg lineage remained ensnared in a cycle of incestuous marriage from which there was no escape. During her brief years in Bavaria, Maria Antonia bore several children, each successive birth greeted with courtly celebration, and every loss recorded in official annals. Tragically, none of her offspring survived infancy, and those who did exhibited severe congenital deformities. The same archaic medical interventions used on her mother bloodletting to balance the humours, purgative herbal concoctions, and enforced bed rest continued to be imposed upon her as though they were sacred rites rather than harmful treatments. Despite her cultivated beauty, her erudition, and her cultured talent on the harpsichord and in the salons of Munich, Maria Antonia possessed no agency over her own life. Every pregnancy was meticulously logged in the royal diaries, and the public and military officialdom alike awaited news of each birth as though it were a political triumph rather than a deeply personal passage. In the year 1692, at the age of 22, Maria Antonia fell gravely ill following her final childbirth. Despite valiant efforts by her personal attendants and the Bavarian court physicians who administered poultices of mercury and opiates to dull her pain, her condition worsened. She passed away quietly in her chambers, the candles guttering as if in mourning at the loss. Her death marked the third consecutive generation of Habsburg women claimed by the uncompromising demands of consanguineous dynastic strategy, cementing the grim reality that no reforms had been made to curb the bloodline's hereditary afflictions. One princess died after another, each life a fragile thread in the tapestry of an inbred dynasty writhing in its own fatal design. Maria Antonia's untimely passing sent ripples of instability through the courts of Europe. The fragile tripartite alliance among Bavaria, Austria, and Spain quivered once more, and neighbouring monarchs sensed an opportunity to redraw the map of power. Diplomatic envoys courted the electorate of Bavaria with offers of territorial concessions and military aid, while in Vienna and Madrid, courtiers speculated on new marriage alliances to shore up dwindling influence. Some European sovereigns even entertained clandestine promises of marriage to lesser members of the Wittelsbach family, all in hopes of prying loose Habsburg assets or securing a foothold in Central European politics. The tragic fates of Margarita Teresa and Maria Antonia revealed the stark vulnerability of a dynasty once thought invincible, the Habsburgs, whose interwoven branches had long been erected as a bulwark against external threats, now found that their greatest adversary was the very blood that bound them together. Monarchs from France to Prussia, from England to the Italian duchies, observed with a mix of fascination and horror as the so-called sacred blood of Europe unravelled in a looping spiral of decay and premature death. Yet, in the face of such sorrow, the political stage pressed on. New alliances were negotiated, treaties rewritten, and dowries revalued to fill the vacuum left by Maria Antonia's demise. The grandeur of the Habsburg name carried on, but beneath its glossy veneer lay the hollow echo of lives extinguished by the pursuit of dynastic purity. The cycle of political marriages continued, with each new union shadowed by the looming spectre of generational weakness. Through the lens of these intimate tragedies, the illusion of Habsburg supremacy faded. The empire that once spanned continents and commanded respect across Europe was gradually exposed as brittle and unsustainable, its foundations cracked by the very policies meant to preserve it. The dynasty's ultimate undoing was not the armies it raised or the treaties it forged, but the misguided belief that a royal lineage could endure untainted through incest, a belief that, for Margarita Teresa and Maria Antonia, proved fatal. In retrospect, the parallel lives and deaths of Margarita Teresa and her daughter Maria Antonia stand as a cautionary portrait of power untempered by humanity. Their stories are immortalized in portraits and chronicles, yet their voices remain silent, overshadowed by the machinery of state. They serve as poignant reminders that political ambition, when placed above the welfare of individuals, can yield not triumph, but ruin. The Habsburg legacy, long revered, now serves as a testament to the high price of sacrificing human lives on the altar of dynastic ambition. The physical and psychological anguish inflicted upon the Habsburg line did not end with the collapse of the 17th century dynasty. In recent decades, modern genetic analyses of Habsburg skeletal remains have confirmed the devastating consequences of centuries of consanguineous policy. Researchers examining DNA extracted from royal tombs have found extremely high levels of homozygosity, an indicator that individuals inherited identical gene variants from both parents. This overwhelming genetic uniformity underlies a spectrum of hereditary disorders, ranging from the characteristic Habsburg jaw deformity to severe neurological conditions, infertility, and compromised immune function. The most poignant example of these inherited afflictions is Charles II, the final sovereign of the Spanish Habsburg branch. Born late in the 17th century, he exhibited an array of debilitating malformations, a protruding lower jaw, weakened limbs, and lifelong zitures. His cognitive development was stunted. He spoke only a few words, if at all, and was unable to perform basic scholarly or diplomatic tasks. More tragically, he could not produce offspring, leaving the crown without an heir and directly precipitating the War of the Spanish Succession from 1701 to 1714. European monarchies, sensing the vacuum, launched a protracted struggle for the vacant throne, turning the inability of one ailing king into a continent-wide conflagration. Today's scientists have leveraged state-of-the-art techniques to reconstruct the Habsburg genetic profile, sampling bone and dental material from crypts in the royal pantheon. They have sequenced mitochondrial and nuclear DNA to map inherited mutations. These studies, published in leading biomedical journals, quantify the dynasty's inbreeding coefficient at a figure far exceeding safety thresholds defined for both human and animal populations. In practical terms, the incidence of infant mortality in the Habsburg line was several times higher than in contemporary European royals, and chronic illnesses, such as heart defects and epilepsy, were rampant. The data conclusively demonstrate that the dynasty's sacred blood had become a liability, morphing into a pathological lineage doomed by its own reproductive strategies. The implications of these findings extend beyond historical curiosity. They offer a powerful cautionary tale about the perils of subordinating human welfare to dynastic or political expediency. A policy devised to cement power through intermarriage instead eroded the very vitality of those it was meant to sustain. The silent cells within the Habsburg crypts speak to us across centuries, reminding us that the human genome is not a tool to be manipulated without regard for the health and dignity of future generations. Moreover, the confluence of archival records and genetic science has painted a fuller picture of the tragic arcs of Margarita Teresa and her descendants. Court documents detailing endless pregnancy losses, alongside laboratory charts illustrating genetic bottlenecks, converge to illuminate the personal horrors endured by individuals caught in the machinery of power. These complementary sources compel the modern world to reflect on the ethical dimensions of policy decisions that trade individual rights, particularly those of the vulnerable, for abstract notions of glory or continuity. In an era that increasingly values genomic medicine, the Habsburg case underscores the moral imperative to balance technological capability with respect for human life. As reproductive and genetic therapies advance, we must ensure that the lessons of the past guide our stewardship of these powerful tools. The Habsburg experience stands as a somber reminder that political ambition, left unchecked, can inflict irrevocable harm at the most intimate level, the very blueprint of our being. The tragic legacy of Margarita Teresa and her bloodline thus resonates far beyond the gilded halls of Austria and Spain. It reverberates in the research laboratories of today and in the halls of power, where decisions affecting generations to come are made. Their story demands that we honor scientific progress by embedding it within an unwavering commitment to human dignity, lest we repeat the grievous errors of a dynasty that placed pedigree above people. The tragic story of Margarita Teresa has resonated far beyond the confines of her 17th century courtly existence, inspiring historians, artists, and philosophers alike to reflect on the interplay of power, individual rights, and human dignity. In the sweeping tide of the 18th century Enlightenment, thinkers such as Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau invoked the Habsburg calamity as a powerful argument for the primacy of reason and natural rights. They held up the ordeal of Margarita Teresa, sold into incestuous marriage, before she could consent as a dramatic testament to the necessity of freedom in marital contracts. To Voltaire, the princess's fate underscored the folly of equating dynastic convenience with divine sanction. To Montesquieu, it illustrated the abhorrent consequences of subordinating individual will to the will of a lineage. And to Rousseau, it provided vivid proof that women and children must never be treated as mere political instruments, but rather as autonomous beings entitled to choice and respect. In the realm of the visual arts, Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas emerged as a dual symbol, at once a supreme achievement of Baroque portraiture and a silent indictment of the dehumanizing policies it inadvertently chronicled. Scholars have long noted how the princess's direct gaze, rendered in crystalline detail against a tapestry of court opulence, seems to interrogate the viewer, forcing us to confront the moral abyss underlying her gilded existence. The painting's compositional mastery, its interplay of light and shadow, its subtle reflection of the royal couple in the mirror at the back wall, imbues the scene with a sense of trapped innocence. Critics argue that Margarita Teresa's luminous face and penetrating eyes simultaneously celebrate her individual spirit and condemn the incestuous machinations that undermined her humanity. In the 21st century, the princess's story remains strikingly relevant. Human rights organizations, educational institutions, and lawmakers frequently reference Margarita Teresa in campaigns advocating for child protection, the abolition of forced marriage, and the eradication of gender-based violence. Documentaries and contemporary novels explore her life not merely as historical curiosity, but as a cautionary parable. Never again allow human beings to be traded as property. One filmmaker asserts, framing her ordeal as a universal warning. Every time a modern legal body enacts stricter penalties against child marriage or recognizes the autonomy of minors, Margarita Teresa's spectre is invoked to remind policymakers of the high human cost of treating children as pawns in political or economic strife. The philosophical legacy, anchored by her example, is equally profound. Bioethicists cite the Habsburg case in debates over genetic engineering, arguing that any attempt to manipulate human heredity without rigorous respect for individual welfare risks, repeating the calamities of forced inbreeding. Feminist theorists deconstruct her life as emblematic of patriarchal oppression, urging societies to enshrine consent as an inviolable principle in all personal relationships. In every corner of the academic world, from history departments to gender studies, seminars, Margarita Teresa's narrative is taught as a seminal illustration of how state power, when unchecked by empathy and justice, can distort the most intimate bonds of family and reproduction. Ultimately, Margarita Teresa's enduring legacy is not the title she held, nor the alliance she was meant to cement, but the powerful reminder that genuine greatness in leadership and civilization arises only when authority is tempered by compassion. In Velázquez's painting, the golden-haired child stands apart from the machinery of monarchy, her presence a testament to personal worth, transcending political utility. As an icon of freedom, dignity, and the sanctity of individual choice, she outlasts the very dynasty that sought to exploit her. Her image endures, not just as art history's marvel, but as a perpetual summons to recognize and protect the inherent humanity in every person. no matter the circumstances of their birth. In remembering Margarita Teresa, we affirm a timeless truth. The highest exercise of power is one that preserves, rather than sacrifices, the lives and rights of the vulnerable. Now, having traversed the blood-stained chapters of Margarita Teresa's life, let us turn our gaze to an artistic legacy that endures through time. Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas. The work is more than the portrait of a 5-year-old girl. It is the gateway into the 17th century Spanish court, a realm rife with contradictions between power and innocence. For a moment, allow your eyes to merge with its play of light and shadow. To contemplate the silent narrative, Velázquez sought to convey a message that transcends ceremony and intrigue, awakening our compassion and reflection on the human condition. Las Meninas stands among the most structurally intricate paintings in the history of Western art. At its core, Velázquez positions Princess Margarita Teresa precisely at the composition's focal point. Her face and dress illuminated by a beam of soft, natural light. Behind her, the palace pages, ladies in waiting, and court dwarfs occupy the midground, rendered in more subdued tones. To the left, the artist has included himself, palette and brush in hand, emerging from the shadows. As he captures the royal scene, the background remains enveloped in deeper darkness, swaths of velvet drapery, a half opened or suggesting an unseen antechamber, and, at the painting's far rear, a mirror reflecting the figures of King Philip IV and Queen Mariana of Austria. These elements subtly direct the viewer's attention beyond the canvas, evoking the larger world of monarchical authority that both surrounds and overshadows the young princess. Velázquez's decision to have the princess gaze directly at the audience serves more than an aesthetic function. It acts as a moment of revelation in an otherwise formal court setting. Her steady, unflinching look seems to catch in the act the very mechanisms of a rigid, hierarchical society, while her innocence and youth are gloriously rendered through lifelike brushwork and warm highlights. The cool colour palette of the court attendants and the echoing darkness surrounding them accentuate the chasm between her unspoiled childhood and the burdensome adult world she is poised to enter. Every fold of her satin dress, each pleat of the curtain, and every glint off the mirror's reflective surface contributes to an atmosphere that is both resplendent and decidedly sombre. Despite the pageantry of royal protocol, Velázquez appears intent upon preserving this fleeting instant of genuine freedom for Margarita Teresa, an unguarded moment before the machinery of incestuous dynastic marriage could suffocate her. In this light, Las Meninas transcends its function as a court portrait and emerges as a subtle yet powerful indictment of the political mechanisms that treat human beings as property. The painting's complex arrangement of sight lines invites viewers to consider who is truly observing whom. While the princess meets our gaze, the king and queen reflected behind her position us as participants in the theatre of power, implicating the audience in the perpetuation of these oppressive systems. In subsequent centuries, Las Meninas has come to be viewed as more than a masterful study in perspective and composition. Art historians often describe it as a pictorial text that preserves the Habsburg dynasty's bittersweet memory, not through triumphalist regalia, but through the child's eyes that were destined to be confined by reproductive duty. Velázquez captures not merely the visage of a royal child, but also the latent tragedy of her captivity within a lineage that valued her womb over her personhood. Across the canvas's expanse, we detect multiple layers of meaning, the interplay of light and shadow, the mirror's enigmatic reflection, and the presence of the painter himself combine to create a narrative about surveillance, agency, and vulnerability. Margarita Teresa is at once the subject, the witness, and the silent accuser of the very institution that demands her compliance. In each brushstroke, one senses Velázquez's empathy. He does not merely flatter royal vanity, he elevates the princess's humanity above the sterile pomp of court ceremony. As an enduring emblem of artistic genius and moral conscience, Las Meninas allows modern audiences to look past the ornamental trappings of power and glimpse the fragile individual at its center. The princess's childlike wonder, caught in a moment of unguarded gaze, reminds us that behind every dynastic alliance lies a personal story of agency lost and identity sacrificed. Velázquez's composition compels us to acknowledge that the highest purpose of art is not only to glorify its patrons, but also to bear witness to the human condition, revealing truths that political or social structures might seek to conceal. In this sense, Las Meninas remains a timeless mirror, reflecting both the brilliance of its era and the shadows it cast. Margarita Teresa's bright presence amid the darker tones serves as a powerful metaphor for the resilience of innocence in the face of systemic oppression. Forever frozen at the age of 5, she stands as a testament to the potential for empathy and reflection to shine light into the darkest corners of power. Through this painting, Velázquez grants her a kind of posthumous freedom, immortalizing her essence in a work that transcends the very hierarchies that once sought to constrain her. Many modern viewers who stand before Las Meninas remark on the astonishing depth in the young princess's gaze, as though Margarita Teresa is peering directly into their very souls. This penetrating look is not merely a triumph of lifelike brushwork. It echoes the tragic destiny awaiting her, a fragile aura of innocence confronting the muzzle of dynastic power. In that gaze, one senses a tension between the purity of childhood and the harsh realities of court politics, a silent foretelling of the suffering that lay ahead. This gaze has prompted successive generations to ask provocative questions. Did Velázquez perceive, at some intuitive level, the lamentable fate of his young subject, or was he simply documenting the formalities of royal life, leaving behind an unintentional yet haunting message about the conflict between individual spirit and institutional oppression? While definitive proof of Velázquez's personal intentions remains elusive, contemporary art historians often argue that the painting embeds a powerful warning about the merciless nature of authority. They point to the subtle disjunction between the princess's direct engagement with the viewer and the distant, almost ritualistic posture of her attendants, as evidence that Velázquez was consciously highlighting her isolation. Each time Las Meninas is exhibited, it draws crowds not only for its masterful technique, but also for the psychological resonance it exerts. Visitors, well aware of the tragic context, namely, the marriage for bloodline, sentence imposed upon Margarita Teresa, cannot help but feel the wrenching contrast between the princess's youthful innocence and the grim calculus that governed her life. The more one knows of her story, the starker that contrast becomes. A child's wonder caught in amber, yet destined for the brutality of repeated pregnancies and political expediency. Critics frequently describe her eyes as an invisible rebuke, accusing the viewer of complicity in the very power structures that commodified her. This effect elevates the painting from a static portrait to an unwitting narrator of paradox. On one hand, the composition celebrates the lush pageantry of the Spanish court, the sumptuous silks, the polished armor, the rich chiaroscuro of palace interiors. On the other, the princess's gaze disrupts that spectacle, drawing the viewer into a silent dialogue about the clash between personal dignity and sovereign prerogative. As the audience follows her line of sight, they become part of the drama, forced to reckon with the notion that beauty can conceal unspeakable cruelty. In academic seminars and museum tours, curators often guide spectators to linger on the princess's eyes before moving on to the mirror, reflecting King Philip IV and Queen Mariana. This deliberate pacing underscores how Velázquez's primary subject is not the reigning monarchs, but the child whose very presence calls their rule into question. Each tired footstep echoes with the memory of a life curtailed, of laughter stifled by protocol, of agency denied by birthright. The broader cultural impact of Las Meninas stems from its ability to embody these contradictions in a single frame. The painting becomes a living allegory. While the court's grandeur is meticulously rendered, the princess's direct look collapses, the distance between subject and spectator, asking us to examine our own roles in perpetuating or challenging systems of power. Viewers leave the gallery not only marveling at Velázquez's technical prowess, but also wrestling with uneasy questions about authority, complicity, and the cost of human sacrifice in the pursuit of dynastic ambition. Thus, by virtue of its psychological force, Las Meninas transcends its era and medium to speak to universal themes: the vulnerability of youth, the corrupting influence of unaccountable power, and the redemptive potential of art to testify to injustice. Each new audience, encountering the princess's gaze for the first time, or the 100th, contributes to the ongoing dialogue between past and present, ensuring that both Margarita Teresa's story and the warning implicit in her eyes continue to reverberate across time. The resonance of Las Meninas and the tragic life of Margarita Teresa extended far beyond the gilded halls of El Prado, reaching the salons and pamphlets of the 18th century Enlightenment. Voltaire, ever the champion of reason, cited the princess's fate as a stark illustration of the inhumanity of absolutist regimes. He contrasted the vulnerability of a child forced into incestuous marriage with his ideals of personal liberty, insisting that no government had the right to treat its subjects as mere instruments of policy. Montesquieu, in his influential Spirit of the Laws, examined the legal and cultural structures that enabled such practices, decrying forced marriage as a violation of natural rights and arguing for systemic checks on monarchical authority. Rousseau, whose social contract championed the inherent freedom of the individual, used Margarita Teresa's story to underscore his warning that children are born free, yet everywhere they are in chains. For these philosophies, the Spanish court's treatment of the princess exemplified the urgent need for legal reforms to protect women and children against the tyranny of dynastic ambition. In the cultural sphere, Margarita Teresa evolved into the archetype of the political victim. 19th and 20th century novelists, playwrights, and filmmakers have repeatedly drawn on her life to explore themes of innocence exploited by power. In British and French theatres, productions dramatizing her plight placed her at center stage, embodying the broader struggle for autonomy against entrenched hierarchical systems. Films set in opulent palaces have portrayed her as both a historical figure and an emblematic child, a poignant reminder that the wheels of politics often grind the most vulnerable underfoot. Through these artistic reimaginings, Margarita Teresa transcended her historical context to become a universal symbol of the fight for human dignity. Within museum walls and school curricula, images of the young princess stand as sobering case studies in the dehumanizing effects of viewing individuals as commodities. Art history classrooms dissect Las Meninas not only for its revolutionary composition, but also for its ethical implications. The princess's gaze. Scholas Norte is a silent demand for empathy in an environment that demanded her silence. History textbooks recount her life and death alongside legislative milestones, such as the British Infant Life Preservation Act and the French decrees on child welfare, to illustrate how societies gradually recognized children's and women's rights as paramount. Even a century later, her story continues to galvanize advocacy, reminding educators and students alike that a society's moral progress is measured by its treatment of its most defenseless members. More than 3 centuries removed from her brief life, Margarita Teresa's legacy carries tremendous persuasive power. Human rights activists invoke her narrative when campaigning against child marriage, arguing that the princess's experience demonstrates in stark terms the physical and psychological toll of coerced unions. International bodies such as UNICEF and various women's rights organizations feature her image in presentations on the history of women's oppression, advocating that no tradition or political strategy should override the fundamental principles of bodily autonomy and consent. Conferences on gender equality and child protection frequently begin with references to her fate, setting a moral framework for discussions on legal reforms and enforcement mechanisms. Ultimately, the spiritual heritage of Margarita Teresa extends far beyond the dynastic intrigues of Spain and Austria. She has become a rallying point for the global declaration of children's rights, gender equality, and human dignity, as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child asserts that the best interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. The princess's life serves as a historical touchstone, a cautionary emblem of what happens when human worth is subordinated to power. In this way, Margarita Teresa's story no longer belongs solely to European history. It resonates as a universal clarion call for justice. The child captured in Velázquez's frame gazes across centuries to remind us that every policy, every treaty, and every law must be founded on respect for the individual. Her image endures not merely as an artifact of Habsburg grandeur, but as an enduring testament to the imperative that true leadership measures its success by the protection and empowerment of the innocent. Thus, through the echo of her silent plea, Margarita Teresa contributes to a global creed that the rights of every child and woman are inviolable, and that no political ambition should ever justify their sacrifice. Through the journey of exploring the tragic life of Margarita Teresa and the analysis of the masterpiece Las Meninas, this video not only recounts a dolorous chapter of history, but also imparts profound lessons to its viewers. First, on the value of humanity. The video emphasizes that human dignity is immutable and transcends all political schemes. The tragedy of Margarita Teresa vividly illustrates that when power is placed above an individual's health, freedom, and happiness, the resulting harm is irreversible. The image of the 5-year-old girl in Las Meninas evokes compassion, stirring in each of us empathy for the innocent whose fates were swept up in the currents of power. Second, on freedom and human rights. The story of a princess treated as a political asset warns against any system that disregards the autonomy of women and children. Evidence from history, Enlightenment philosophy, and modern genetic research all affirm that marriage is only legitimate when based on love and voluntary consent, never coerced for ulterior motives. Third, on historical and legal lessons. Studying the Habsburg inbreeding marriage policy reveals the catastrophic consequences when royal bloodlines are exploited as political tools. This reminds modern nations to enact laws that protect children's rights, ban forced marriage, and prevent gender-based violence. The story also highlights the importance of learning from the past to reform systems, preventing the repetition of mistakes that brought down a once mighty regime from within. Fourth, on artistic legacy. Velázquez's Las Meninas is not only a painting masterpiece, but also a pictorial text, preserving the princess in a rare moment of freedom before the court's power could crush her. The canvas transcends ceremonial pageantry to tell a story that deeply moves the viewer's soul. Its artistic value is inseparable from its humanistic message. Every gaze and every detail in the work testifies to the severity of unchecked authority. Fifth, on the responsibility of today's generation, the video calls us not merely to reflection but to action, to join efforts protecting children's rights, fighting for gender equality, and speaking out against all forms of exploitation of human beings for power or personal gain. Each viewer can spread this message through education, media, or social activism, helping build a society that respects and safeguards human dignity. In conclusion, this video offers a comprehensive perspective, from Margarita Teresa's historical tragedy and scientific confirmation of genetic consequences to the Enlightenment thinkers' awakening and the enduring value of art. We learn that power cannot be sustained by sacrificing human lives, that history, art, and science must work in concert to defend human rights, and that the greatest achievement of any civilization is its capacity to uphold the freedom, dignity, and lives of every individual. Only then can we truly call ourselves a progressive and compassionate society.